How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, today we're going to talk about our mental health, more particularly the cliche, turning the switch on and off. What does that really mean? And is that even possible? I'm not a big fan of this, turning the switch on and off. So me and Joe Pomponio, who's going to be my guest today, is going to discuss our thoughts on this phrase, turn the switch on and off, and maybe give some advice on what we need to do to maintain a strong, healthy mindset when working in corrections. Hey guys, if you haven't gotten the chance, don't forget I got some books on the market. On Amazon, I got Inmate Manipulation Decoded and Breaking Boundaries. Breaking Boundaries is a book about understanding the process and hopefully preventing undue familiarity. Those books are phenomenal reads. And if you're in training, you know, these are books that could really serve a good, strong foundation for training. But these books are really for anyone new, senior, management. I mean, these books are really written for anyone who just wants to decide to pick up and read it, especially if you work in corrections, whether custody or on the civilian side. I also have a few books out at Blue 360 Media: How to Succeed in Corrections, Tips for New Correctional Officers and Their Supervisors, Managing Unruly Inmates, and I have another two coming out called Unlocking Leadership Potential in Corrections, and one on the Definitive Guide to Report Writing. I have the link to some of those books in my description, or you can go to the Blue 360 website and just search those books, maybe even just my name, but you should see 5 books of mine that are being published in Blue 360 Media. And guys, along with the 2 books from Amazon, these are just some really good training. I actually believe that you could probably build a whole curriculum based on the books that are that I have written so far for corrections. Okay, let me get Joe in. All right, Joe. Hey, you mind introducing yourself, sir?
Yes, sir. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections, 29 years and 6 months. Currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division, and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
All right. Now, Joe, obviously working in corrections is an extremely stressful job. I know that when some people are going through the academy, or even when they're, you know, dealing with the stress right now, a lot of people will sit there and tell their peers or tell the people they supervise, hey, you got to learn when to turn things on or when to turn things off. And I think what they mean is basically, you know, when you're a correctional officer, you turn off the home life. And when you're at home, you turn off the correctional role, you know. And I actually don't believe that is good advice. As I've evolved in this profession, I've done shows before. And truly the shows that are more recent have led away from that advice. I think I've been in the profession a little bit longer to know that that advice is not just bad advice. It's actually an impossibility. I think it's extremely hard to be able to isolate both roles. I think they are going to bleed into each other. And it's just a matter of maintaining that switch somewhere in the neutral side. Would you agree to that, Joe?
Yeah, you know, it's almost virtually impossible to turn it off. You know, they have that saying down here as well: do your 8 and hit the gate and leave it behind you when you go home, and vice versa. But it's one of those phrases that sounds good in theory, but it's not very well practiced, because, you know, anybody who has any kind of passion, you know, for the job, or, you know, their passion for their home life, you know, they're going to bleed over. It's not just as simple as turning the switch off and just totally blocking what you've done for the day. It's more along the lines of balance of how do you manage both sides, and how do you balance, you know, how do you balance the job versus your home life, and how to de-stress yourself at the end of a work day. You know, it's not just so simple as walking out of the gate and shutting it off, especially if you're in any kind of leadership position. I mean, it's hard for the correctional officers, because, you know, when they're at work, they're thinking about the ball games that they're missing with their kids, or, you know, anniversaries or dates or birthdays that they're missing. And, you know, when they're at home, you know, they're hearing about things that are happening, and they're in their mind, well, damn, you know, if I was there, I could have been there to help out. You know, so there's always going to be some thoughts on or off the job about the job, or there's going to be, you know, on or off thoughts about, you know, your personal life while you're at work. So, you know, turning the switch on and off, yeah, it sounds good in theory, but in practice, it's almost impossible.
Right. And that statement is actually very position driven. I mean, we play many different roles. I mean, working in corrections is just one of those roles. But when you go home, you know, you could be a mother, father, brother, sister, son, uncle. I mean, you know, the roles that we play are tremendous. I mean, it's just a matter of it's funny. It's a matter of who we think we need to be in the moment. But at the end of the day, the foundation for each of those roles is who you are as a person. You know, when in corrections, when we decide to bring people to the academy, when they pass the initial interview process and everything, and now we decide to introduce them to the instructors, these instructors aren't transforming people, they're cultivating people, which means that whoever that person becomes later on, when they decide to work in corrections, when they make it through and they become that correctional officer, it's built on who they were, because the people saw the greatest potential. Now to go ahead and tell people that when they're in the profession, you have to separate things. You have to separate, you know, being a correctional officer from your home life. You know, it's weird, because I would like to think that part of who you are plays into that role as a correctional officer. Therefore, the people, you're not defined by the position, but rather you define the position. And I think some of us get confused about that. They believe that everything's kind of isolated. So then people are like, well, who I really am is when I'm at home. It's like, no. Who you really are is who you really are every moment of the day. And when people say you got to turn the switch on and off, a lot of people believe that when you're saying turn the switch on and off, especially if they believe that the home life is who they really are, is you're telling them to shut off who they really are at any moment in time, you know, when they're in corrections. And I disagree with that. I think that's an impossibility. I think that you're always going to have who you are bleed through any role that you play, because it's foundational. And to sit there and say that the person is able to shut down who they are so they can play that role as a correctional officer is totally foolish, because at the end of the day, it's what they were brought in for. They were seen because who they are had the potential for them to be great in this profession. And that's what I think plays out a lot, Joe. I think a lot of people believe that when you're talking about turning the switch on and off, a lot of people have come up and say that, well, Gangi, my home life is really who I am. So when I'm in corrections, I got to play this role. So I got to remember to turn the switch on when I'm in corrections, or turn the switch off, whatever the phrase is. And it's like, yeah, but then if that's the case, if you're turning something on, what are you actually turning off? And at one point, I would think it becomes very confusing.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's defined by who you are. It's not defined by being a correctional officer. It's not defined by being the mother, father, sister, brother, you know, whatever. You know, who you are at home, you're always going to be, regardless of what position or title you're going to hold. When you're at work, it's the same issue. You know, you're still always going to be who you are at the job. You know, what sets a person apart from everybody else is how you manage both sides. Because, you know, believe it or not, even at the correctional officer level, when you begin to understand and manage, you know, your stresses of the home life or your stresses of the job, and you still are the same person that you are, you're actually starting the conditioning process for being a supervisor. Because if you can handle that stress, you can handle the stresses of the, you know, the everyday job. And, you know, especially if you have a supportive family, they know, you know, because you can't just turn off being a correctional officer. You can't just turn off being a father. That will never happen. And it's not just this job. It's any job. You know, you're never going to be able to shut off who you are at that job. You're never going to be able to shut off who you are at the house. And, you know, trying will cause you more stress than anything. I found that out early on. You know, you can't just shut off who you are. You know, we've all had those moments in our profession. You know, a good example for me is, you know, I was at work when I got the telephone call to my mom. My mother had passed away. And, you know, you start playing all these events. If I hadn't been here at this damn job, if I'd been with her, you know, and, you know, my dad, believe it or not, was the one that said, look, son, your mother knows how hard you work in your profession, and she wouldn't have had it any other way. She wouldn't have wanted you here to see this, you know. So having a good support system actually helps you maintain a good balance between the stresses of your profession and the stresses of your home life.
And Joe, I'm going to tell you something. And for people that are watching this, you know, if you continue to isolate roles, not understanding that somehow they bleed into each other, then you're going to live a life where you're driven by the situation, which makes it very unpredictable. Yep. Where you can be able to manage it. And no, when we say manage it, we're talking about the emotions. You know, like if there's a concern I have at work, a lot of us may believe that we can only talk to the people about work, when at the end of the day, maybe that's great. Maybe they'll get me ready to be that role I need to be as a correctional officer or whatever that role is. But maybe whatever's happening at work is affecting me to the core. It's not affecting my role so much, but rather it's affecting me, who I am. And now I need to talk to somebody who knows me outside of the uniform. I need to talk to somebody who can truly relate to me. So and again, it could be something I'm struggling with. And I know some people are like, well, you really shouldn't share what's happening at the job because you don't want to invite your family into those horrors. Well, here's the funny thing. There's ways you can control the specifics. Like I could talk to my wife and tell her I saw a hanging today that got to me, or I saw an inmate kill themselves today that got to me. And she's not going to ask me how they did it. All she knows is, okay, somehow there was a suicide that affected me. And now the thing is, it's now me and my wife having that conversation. And maybe I could protect her for some details. But if it's the details that are bothering me, then I may have to ask her, hey, can I share something with you? And no offense, my wife, if she knows it's bothering me, my wife is not going to say, well, I don't want to hear that. She's not going to say that because she wants me to make sure that I'm a good father. Whatever role I got to play. So my wife's going to say, okay, clear the room. What's going on? What did you see? What's bothering? It's tough to be in a relationship with people in this profession. Corrections, any type of first responder. And I do like to think that the people you marry, the people that you're connected with, your family, whoever it is that you have that connection with that knows you, needs to understand the complications of, you know, what that could entail, which could include something at work that's truly been affecting me. And then your loved one knowing that because you're not yourself, and then asking you, and then you being able to be open with them. And people are like, well, you want to protect them. Yeah, but you know what? They also understand the role that they're in. And sometimes that effort that you want to protect them. Let me tell you one more thing, Joe, and I know this plays out. When you want to protect them, that means that you no longer speak to them. So you start internalizing everything and you're changing. You don't realize it. You're changing. You used to come home and communicate. Now you don't say a word to your loved one, you know, and eventually they're like, hey, what's going on? You haven't spoken to me in a while. Or, hey, the kids are wondering what's up with you. You know, you don't play games with them anymore. I'm going through some stuff at work. Well, do you want to talk about it? Nah, I don't want to talk about it. Yeah, but it's affecting the family right now as it is because you're not saying anything. And now, all of a sudden, when you're overwhelmed because you're just a powder keg, you're one incident away from blowing up, you know, because you haven't handled each incident the way it should be. So you don't know what's going to trigger you. And then now all of a sudden, when you feel, you know what, maybe I should share something just to, because I'm not feeling right. Your family doesn't even know who you are anymore because you have grown so far away from them that even if they go to try to help you, the person that you are is no longer a person that they can truly relate to. I mean, how true is that, Joe? And Joe, where is the balance, Joe? I mean, I know a lot of people say you got to protect your family from the details, but at the end of the day, I would like to think that when we're with somebody, for, you know, someone that has chosen to be with us, that is a first responder, or, you know, be with us, I mean, we're a first responder. They understand the concerns about our job. And I think if I had my wife tell me if I had a concern and she was quick to censor me, I'm sorry. I think my wife at that point is the concern, because again, if I have concerns that I need to get off my chest, I should be able, you know, safely to be able to speak to my wife so she's able to understand what it is that I'm truly going through, so she can address the man that's behind the uniform, or the woman behind the uniform, depending on who you are.
Yeah, I mean, you got to find the appropriate cutoff point to, you know, what you share with them, you know, in order to get it off your chest and de-stress and become the husband and father, you know, without totally shutting off your significant other or, you know, whoever it is in your family that you talk to. You know, you want to be able to come home and give them the general idea of what happened, you know, saying, you know, like suicide, for example. You know, yeah, we had an offender commit suicide today, and you know, it was this whole big ordeal, and you know, your spouse or whoever, you know, should, you know, be able to sympathize with that, and, you know, well, you know, that sucks. I'm sorry you had a bad day, versus you coming home and giving them all the specifics to the point where, you know, they're almost afraid to ask you how your day is, because, you know, as soon as you walk in the door, they automatically go into, oh shit, what, you know, what are we facing now? You know, what happened, and, you know, what kind of, you know, emotional wreck is he going to be today? You know, you got to find that balance point, you know, to keep them in the loop, but not terrorize them with the specifics to where, you know, they're totally afraid to even ask how your day is. And especially if you're on a, you know, a facility where there's homicides and suicides damn near every day. You know, you don't want to always come home and just tell them about the bloodbath you just got done dealing with, and that, you know, you just, you know, give them enough to keep them feeling like they're involved in your life, and that, you know, you trust them enough to be that person to come home and kind of vent to and get it off your chest, so you can go on about your day with your family, without, you know, the end result is you don't want to push your personal life and your family further away due to the job, and same with the job. You don't want to push your coworkers away because of stresses at the house. You know, there's always going to be that one person on either side that you have that you can kind of vent to about one or the other without, you know, pushing them away with specifics.
Yeah, and I also think, like, when you start to shut down, it kind of builds on you not want to express vulnerability. So having said that, you know, maybe you not talking to your loved one, because remember, talking to Joe at the job is a lot different than talking to my loved one. Talking to Joe at the job, Joe's going to kind of coach me how to get through, because he's been there before, done that. And ultimately it's to prepare me to take the post the next day. Where talking to your loved one is about you. You know, and sometimes I may be able to willing to talk to Joe about a situation that I just dealt with, and Joe building me up. But I think when it comes to addressing you, the vulnerability of it all, and having to admit that a vulnerability becomes a lot harder. So the last thing you want to do is bring that to life by telling someone that something's bothering you. Now, granted, when I talked about specifics, if it's the specific that's bothering you, like, I have seen a lot of suicides in my life, but there was one that did get to me, and there was a specific behind it that got to me, that I immediately called my wife and I had to share it, and she didn't shut me down. I shared it in a very professional way. I didn't I love what Joe said. I'm not coming home expressing bloodbaths, whatever it is, but I am saying this is what I saw today, and I can't shake it. And then my wife would say, like, well, you saw a few suicides. What makes this one a bit different? She probes a little bit more, and I'm going to be willing to share it. My wife knows what questions to ask, and it's not in an effort to make me share gory details, but it's an effort to find out what really happened. Like, how many suicides have you had in your career? Dozens. Okay, so what is it? Why is this the first time that you're calling me at work? You know, you've never called me at work about a suicide. What made this one a bit different? And it's good for me to go ahead and that's why I'm with her for, you know, to unload. And I'm telling you guys, I've been with my wife since back end of 1998. So, you know, we were married in 2006. I've been in correction since 2002. She's been with me the whole ride. I don't think I have changed, and we'll share something of that later on. Me and Joe will share some personal stories here, but she knows what questions to ask me. She knows when something's bothering me from work, and we don't allow it to fester. I mean, she'll catch me right at the door if I'm going through something and basically say, hey, come here. What's going on? You kind of went right into the room when your first thing is you go to the kids. And, you know, so I truly believe that these people in your life, the ones outside of work, help you maintain who you need to be so you don't let the role define you. Because this is my biggest concern, Joe, when it comes to turning the switch on and off, is it does become confusing, especially when you're constantly turning on and off who you are, because that's technically what you're doing. And then eventually what's going to happen, it's going to get stuck in the whatever on or off position. I don't know which one is which, to be honest with you, but it's going to get stuck in one position and it's going to wind up dominating both areas of your life. And sadly, what I think is going to wind up winning here is the correctional role is going to wind up dominating, because we get trained not to express vulnerability. So I think what happens here is what tends to get stuck is the correctional role. And now what happens is that when you wind up going home, your wife's like, I married you, not a correctional officer. Yeah. You know, does that make sense, Joe? I think that's a pretty powerful but truthful statement.
It does. After a while, you wind up turning off the switch at the wrong times. You know, yeah, we want to turn the switch off about the job when we get home, but sometimes when you turn that switch off, you also turn your family off, because you're not expressing your vulnerability to say, hey, you know, something happened today. I seen some shit and I just need to get it off my chest. And it's the same thing at work. You know, when you get to work, and sometimes you turn that switch off too by accident. And, you know, just because you don't want to express your vulnerability and you don't want to get it off your chest, or you don't want anybody to know that the shit affected you. You wind up shutting your coworkers out too. So, I mean, you know, that switch is a good and bad thing. And, you know, as you go along in your career and progress and see more and more things in your career that may affect you mentally, people have a bad habit of just turning that switch off at the wrong time and not expressing anything. And that will do more damage than not, you know, saying anything at all.
Yeah. And guys, even in corrections, I definitely remained me. And there's been conflicts, because sometimes what happens here is, and it's rare, but I had one moment where what I thought I needed to believe as a correctional officer may have conflicted with who I am as a person. And it didn't happen until about my 18th year. And I've shared this story before. So basically, I dealt with a individual who was one of our food service workers who, you know, kind of was a bit problematic, always at the metal detector, just always a problem at the metal detector, young kid. And the senior officer, outstanding senior officer, controls the lobby, basically would send her to me probably once every month, because this person was falling through these concerns once every month. And I would, I had a big bug just fly past me. I'm in the basement. So I would chat with her, try to, you know, cultivate her. I mean, there was something there, but just try to cultivate her into understanding, you know, building relationships with people. What the lobby officer is trying to get you to do is correct. You know, just trying to build a comfortable bridge, because at any moment that lobby officer could have literally just written up a bunch of reports to get this person out. But he because she was a little bit disrespectful, but he didn't. He knew she was young, maybe even had a daughter of his own. I don't know. And just kept on bringing her to my office. And I would chat with her, and, you know, for a while it would go smooth. And then sadly enough, she got some charges on the streets. Very generalized. I can't really talk specifics, but it does relate to a moment about me, so I do want to share it. And the charges on the streets was going to lead to her termination, but there were also things that were maybe a little bit questionable that she was doing inside the facility, and ultimately the termination on the streets was actually going to stop the further investigation of what's happening in the facility, because, you know, hey, we're going to get her lose her job anyway. Let's just, you know, stick to what we have on the streets, and she's not going to come back anyway. So I wind up having to serve her charges inside the prison. And the concern that was happening in the prison, which we wind up not having to fully investigate because she never came back anyway. She wasn't going to be allowed to come back because of the charges on the streets, was really about undue familiarity between her and another inmate and the potential for crossing the line. Now, as a correctional officer, there's a zero tolerance for that. It's something you do not forgive because there's a betrayal there. There's just, you know, it's I trust you, and then now you went ahead and betrayed us. And guys, that is a very strong thing in corrections, because if I trust you, Joe, I start to share personal things with you, and next thing I know, I find you're messing with an inmate. I don't know what becomes bedroom talk. You know, I don't know, and could that be about me? So you wind up pretty much having that zero tolerance for that. I mean, when I say zero tolerance, guys, I mean a very aggressive zero tolerance. I mean, it's literally as aggressive as it could be. I don't want to say the words that are in my head, but basically they're not good words about the individual that's done it, that has crossed that line, or you believe that has crossed that line. So I have to now go to the facility and the county facility to serve her paperwork. And in my head, I had a conflict. One was the aggressiveness that I needed to be in that role as a correctional officer. But now there was a piece of me coming through where it was like, well, I've dealt with this person. Could I have done something better? What signs did I miss? Now it's funny, guys, because I wrote this in one of my books. When you see an officer or staff member being handcuffed and being escorted out for what could be corruption charges. Now, mind you, she was really removed for stuff that happened on the streets, but there was a potential for her to be removed if she had remained in the facility, just an investigation that was going on at the time. You see two things. One is, well, you feel two things. Sorry, you feel two things. One could be anger or frustration, you know, at the person, because let's say I don't know the officer, I don't know the person, and they get caught up. The quick thing is angry and frustration because it's a general picture of betrayal. He took his role as an officer, or she took a role as an officer, and then she went ahead and got exploited, and now she's, or he's messing with an inmate. So it's a very generalized picture. There's really no connection to it. So the role kind of takes over. And basically, this is what your role tells you you need to be, or who you need to be. The role right now tells me I need to be angry at this person. I need to be frustrated. And it's just a connection to the role because I don't know this person. But when you do know the person and you kind of picture the same scenario, the potential for the same scenario in this case, there's a connection to the person. So you start to feel disappointed or even betrayed. This isn't a general picture. This is a specific. So now I'm connected. So as I'm driving, I'm feeling the latter because I know this person. So it's more about being disappointed and betrayed. But then I have the position playing out in my head, wanting to be aggressive, you know. So I finally make it to the facility. I serve the paperwork, and I just wanted to be done with it. Just serve the paperwork, be done with it. As I'm going out, she asked me. She's like, I don't know what to do. What should I do? And I remember pausing for a second, and then the position in me is very aggressive, guys. It's like, we're adults here, you know, fuck this person, blah, blah, blah. I'm out. She made her own bed, blah, 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 and you walk. But then there's something also inside of me that says, I've dealt with her. Maybe she was just confused at the time, trying to give up so many excuses for her. Because now there's the human side of me speaking where I need to do the right thing. And what is the right thing? Is the right thing what the profession expects from me? Or is the right thing the human side of me? And now it's a matter of what speaks louder in your head. Because at the end of the day, what speaks louder in your head is what matters after this is all done. And I'll explain that in one second. So I decide to turn around. Within 2 minutes, explain what the paperwork is, what it is that she's looking at. I mean, I could have been asked and said, call your lawyer, but I knew what the paperwork was. And I explained to her, and then I said, hey, now you may want to do this, or I would accept this, but everything's your call. I'll just give advice. I remember her, you know, even saying thank you to some extent. You've been good to me. And I just kind of let it be. I left. I went back in my car, and I was so happy with myself because when I turned around and helped that individual, I didn't turn around for her. I turned around for me. Because then I knew after 18 years at that point that the profession didn't change me. The position was telling me what to do, but there was still something left in me that was telling me, Gangi, if you don't turn around, you are going to regret this for the rest of your life. And you know what's funny? And this is more on the long-term side of it all, Joe, was I pictured myself once I was retired and the position no longer mattered. I'm going to ask myself, did I do this job correctly? And everything that I look at is going to have nothing to do with the position, but rather me, the decisions I made. And for some reason, because I know me, I felt that this situation right here that I just mentioned would haunt me. I just know me. I know me. I would be haunted with someone asking for help to some extent and me just making that choice, because there's nothing unprofessional in my manners to give help. I want to make sure people get that clear. You know, I know what my role is. I know what my role was for 22 years. I know when I can provide help and when you're on your own on that. But this was a choice that I could make either way. No one was forcing me to. I didn't have to, or I could have. There's nothing being broken here. So this was something that was totally up to me, my discretion. So I had no excuse of whether I gave it or not. It's going to be something I would have to live with. So I believe later on when I retire, that choice will be the thing I fall back on. And literally, I still use it today, is I remain me. There was no turning off or on. There was none of that. It was who defined the role you are, Gangi, when you were a correctional officer, when you became a supervisor. Was it the position? Because if it's a position, then let her deal with it herself and walk away. Or is there something about you that must remain? And is this the challenge right now? Is this the moment that you have to step up and say, this is who I am? And this is what I've chosen to be. Is this the moment where you say you define the position, or does the position define you? And I think that's a good scenario, Joe. Does that make sense? Because it is a balance.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. As somebody who's had to walk off several employees, you know, I can tell you from experience that the woulda, coulda, shouldas can eat you alive if you let it. But there's an aspect of you doing your job and the human element at the same time. You know, it's easy to go in there and be totally unprofessional, call them out of their name and you know, call them everything but a dirty child of God and everything else. But at the same time, you know, the human, you know, you're not lost when the human aspect kicks in, because you know this person may be a single parent, this person, you know, may be an only child, this parent, you know, there's a human aspect that's still within you to be professional, to give the right advice, you know, right suggestions as to what they may or may not want to do or need to do, even though that, you know, what they've done is considered one of the ultimate betrayals in the corrections profession. You know, especially if it's somebody that you have worked with, you know, for long term. You know, I have one in particular. I worked with her for going on 7 years, you know, knew her kids, knew her husband, you know, and when we found out, you know, that, you know, she had betrayed us, and I'll just leave it at that. You know, I was pissed off, highly disappointed, but I think I was more pissed off than anything. And, you know, what her decisions, I left to be her. And, you know, I made it clear how disappointed I was in her. You know, I made it clear that, you know, what she has done is not okay. I made it clear, you know, that I felt betrayed, not only as a person, but as a lieutenant, for everything that I put in her, as far as, you know, training and knowledge and, you know, everything I've done to help cultivate her. And, you know, but at the same time, you know, this person's a parent, you know, this person, you know, needs a salary to kind of make ends meet in their family household. And, you know, all you can do is from the human aspect of it is to offer advice, and, you know, without letting your command presence take over and say what you really want to say. That's when you know that you're a well-rounded professional, when you can find a way to be pissed off but still offer advice to try to help that person in the end run.
Yeah, that's powerful, Joe, because I think ultimately when we share these stories, what we're telling us or what we're telling everybody is there are going to be moments of conflict. And I think sometimes the conflict comes between the challenges of who you are and what the profession expects. And sometimes we actually may believe they're on extremes, you know, so we don't look for the middle road. We just either, so maybe this is what it is, Joe. When you have this scenario of light on or off, it presents every situation as either or. You know, either or. You're on one side or the other, where I don't think that's the healthy balance. I think that you can't live in this profession thinking that every choice is an either or choice. You know, I've survived in my career for over 22 years, maybe without even intentionally knowing it, but I've never lived my life when I felt there was conflict. I never limited myself to an either or decision. I try to understand what that conflict is and then bring balance. And this, guys, this may not even be consciously being aware of it. This is just me I listen to everything about myself. Whatever goes on in my head, I listen to everything. You know, so it's about me trying to realize where that best resolve is. So at the end of the day, I can move forward, both, you know, as a professional, yes, but probably more important so as just a human being. And you know what's crazy, Joe? And I can honestly say that, but this is only my experience. I can't speak for everyone else. I've never really been in a situation in corrections where who I am as a person and what was expected of me are on extremes. So maybe I've been lucky. You know, I mean, yes, they're not always perfectly aligned in some cases. But with that said, I have never been to a point in my career where I had to do something in my career that was totally an opposite of who I am as a person. And I also have to say vice versa. I've never, you know, vice versa, however that partners out. But I've always known that there's a middle. And I think that's what kind of led. So everybody has strengths. And as you move up, especially when you get into these appointed positions, it's hard to find someone in corrections that's well-rounded on everything, because that's a bunch of crap. Corrections is just such a wide array of things that you need. That's why when you move up, you have more resources because they complement your weaknesses. But I would like to think that there are certain strengths that you have that excel above normal. And maybe, okay, I could put this person here and this person can complement this. And I think for mine is finding solutions that are more long-term, finding balance, finding middle road when everybody is at either side. Somehow I come in and try to find middle ground and then work from there. But Joe, I mean, you have to agree, Joe, the on and off makes it very either or. Like in efforts to resolve concerns, it's either you have to choose one side or the other, and maybe that's easier. Maybe that's easier. But I think, to be honest with you, people that survive in this profession, both professionally but also through their own mental health, are people that realize that life isn't about either or. It's about being somewhere in the middle. And I think there's good behind that, Joe, because when you make the effort to bring things in the middle, you no longer have to justify extreme choices. Yeah. You know, I don't have to say, well, I had to do that because you're going to find, let me tell you something real quick. In corrections, probably in many first responder positions, whatever it is, the role could be so demanding that you're going to find yourself justifying every decision you make just so you could bring balance. And basically you wind up having a profession that's full of excuses of why you had to make things that doesn't connect to who you really are. When it's a matter of, if I got to make a decision that's on this side, how do I bring myself into it? So when I make a decision, I don't need the justification. I now have reason. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, for me, I guess it's more of what I would call an emotional and professional compromise. You know, there are times where you have to be stern, you have to be hard, you have to be direct. Yes. But at the same time, you still need to be human. You know, you can't be either or. You know, again, it's one of those, it sounds good in theory, but in practicality, it's not. You know, and anybody who leads their life that way, I can tell you they're probably suffering with some sort of emotional issues themselves, because I can guarantee you, if you're able to turn that switch on and off abruptly, you are going to make choices in your career that could have long-term effects to the person that you're dealing with. I've seen supervisors who were able to turn that switch on and off, especially when it comes to, let's just say, dirty staff. And we're able to go in there and be the correctional. You betrayed us. You suck. You know, you're less than life to us. And, you know, I remember one particular event, you know, it actually led to a successful suicide of that employee later. And, you know, what you say and how you conduct yourself could have everlasting effects on somebody down the road. And unfortunately, those lasting effects have a way to come back of biting you in the ass. It has a way of coming back to haunt you because, you know, 20 years down the line, after you retire and your brain starts to slow down a little bit, you start replaying things in your mind. And, you know, events like that will come up. And then the woulda, coulda, shouldas come in. And, you know, it's not about the on or off position. It's about the emotional balance in which you approach the situation. There's nothing 100% either lieutenant or human. Everything and every interaction I had with one of my employees were both. And, you know, for me, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that my heart is in a good place because of it. When I have people, you know, from 15, 20 years ago contact me and thank me for the way I handled things when they were going through the worst of times in their personal life and became a shitty correctional officer, or, you know, for the advice and the help that I offered off the clock, whether it would be just go over and listen to them vent. You know, when you have something like that and people come back to you from 20 years past and tell you thank you, that's when you know you have achieved the perfect mixture of human versus profession.
That's so spot on, Joe. I love that. The humor. You know what, Joe? I have seen people when they get done with their career, what they do is they tend to look back, and when they look back, they try to look back at where they feel their greatest impact was. And it's funny because it drifts away from position, but rather human connection. And wherever that connection may be, you know, I mean, as an officer or whoever it is on the front line, your positive interactions may solely be with the inmate population because that's where you have the influence over. Whereas you move up, it could be inmate population, it could be staff. I mean, either way, it could be even as a senior officer, it could be a rookie. Whatever the case may be, it's usually in a position where you have influence on. And I've seen a lot of people, if they feel that interaction that has been a defining moment of their career is, let's say, involves an inmate, they always apologize first and basically say, listen, I'm sorry. I want you to know I didn't do anything wrong. But when I look back at my career, I remember interacting with an inmate, and it's like they need they need to justify that interaction. And it's like you don't need to justify. You're allowed to have those human interactions. That's what the universal precaution is. Universal precaution doesn't stop those interactions. You just be wary of how you approach those interactions. But I think that if you wind up, like you said, Joe, if you wind up focusing on these switches, you wind up truly being driven so much by the situation or what you believe the situation demands that you do have a regret, and you do have a lot of things that are going to be bottled up and internalized. And unfortunately here, you wind up just have excuses, you know, just excuses that really don't fit well with who you are. And then in order for, now this is the scary part, Joe, and this is where the mental health component matters, is eventually if you start to create these excuses or these justifications because that's what you believe the situation demands, so the situation kind of starts to break you away from who you are, and basically you start getting defined, in this case, let's say by the position, the problem is those justifications become, in your case, reality. And now you have the constant conflict of who you really are versus what you believe the profession expects from you. And I've never, at least more recently now, I really can't say, I don't really remember. I remember the light switch being taught as a new boot, but I'm trying to see if I remember if anybody ever told me, because technically, if you look at that light switch scenario that people bring out, if I want to interpret it, and maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, I interpret it as basically we're gonna transform you into something that you may not be, and therefore you have to separate both roles. And I take it that way. But yet, I guess as we've evolved in corrections, we realize that's not a healthy way to live. And you're not really transforming people. You're cultivating them from their potential. Because if that's the case, if you were transforming people, then just let anybody in the academy. Who gives a shit? You're going to change them. So what the hell do I care? Just they could be a shithole, you know, but bring them in because you're going to transform them. And no, nobody can do that. You can't. You can't. And no instructor is going to be able to transform people. What they got to do is they got to look hard for that 1% potential and cultivate it, make it grow. But if someone does not have the potential, they're not going through the basics to get into this profession. So I like to think that when you're going through the interview process, you're weeding out the negative, but really looking at something that you can help cultivate into growth. So I think that on-off thing, I think it kind of isolates the roles. And then you're being taught that, you know, you can't allow them to bleed in. So eventually what happens is you wind up believing that you got to internalize. You know, internalize until you pretty much explode. So I think in evolution, Joe, I think what we have to recognize is the fact that switch. I'm going to go as far as saying that switch doesn't exist, because there's no way in hell you're able to control that part unless you wind up shutting one part down. And how healthy is that?
It's not healthy at all. You know, I don't, I remember having to teach in the academies, you know, about doing your 8 and hitting the gate, leaving your stuff at home and leaving your stuff at work. And I hated that aspect of it because I knew that shit wasn't true. You know, from practical experience, I knew that shit wasn't true. You can't just get in your car and drive home and leave, you know, traumatic incidents that happen at work behind you. And, you know, the same for at home. You know, you can't leave traumatic incidents at home behind you when you come to work. You know, you got to find that balance where one doesn't overtake the other. You know, I don't consider it so much a switch as I consider it a fan speed. You know, you can either be high, medium, or low. You know, it all depends on the person, where they're at emotionally in their life. You know, how capable are they of, you know, being able to control the tempo and the temperature of both worlds. It's not an easy aspect to do, but I'm telling you, if you are trying to use it as an on and off switch, it's almost impossible to do. And the only person you're going to cause harm to is yourself, either in your professional life or your personal life. You know, we all do it for the wrong reasons. You know, I want to protect my family from the horrors of the shit I see at work. But at the same time, I don't want to push them away. And, you know, when I go to work, you know, when, you know, you lose a family member, you know, mother, father, sister, brother, you know, whatever, and you go back to work, you don't want to push them away by eating the fact that, you know, this death is playing on you because you might have been at work when the death happened. You know, you're going through all this emotional internal turmoil, you know, within yourself. And there's no possible way you can shut that shit off at the gate in either direction, whether you're going home or coming to work. It's impossible. You're never going to be able to do it. If you are the type of person that has to offer yourself justifications on a daily basis for the shit that you do, for the choices you make, I'm telling you, you're gonna put yourself in an early grave or give yourself ulcers. You know, the biggest thing is finding the balance. Don't justify things to yourself. Work through it emotionally. You know, if you gave the situation your all, and you know in your heart that you made the right decision and you did it humanly, you shouldn't have a need to justify things to yourself. The situation will justify itself to you. You know, things will turn out the way they should. Things will turn out, you know, that the way they should have turned out. You know, if you make decisions and you lead your life on justifications, you have bigger issues than you thought. You know, it could be PTSD, it could be bipolar, it could be, you know, there's a whole plethora of shit it can be. Giving yourself these issues is not going to do you, your professional family, or your personal family any good whatsoever.
Yeah, and guys, there's a thing called cognitive dissonance, where your beliefs don't coincide with your actions, and at one point you have to settle it. And usually what winds up happening is it's easier to kind of start justifying the excuses and start agreeing with the actions and ultimately changing your beliefs. And that's not something you want to do. And for the family on the outside who are looking and may watch this video, I want you to be wary of something too. You know, let's say one day you get in an argument with your loved one, and so, you know, we all get in arguments. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, that's part of being in an open and honest relationship. As long as you're not disrespectful to each other. I mean, we are going to disagree, but man, sometimes the loved ones could be a problem, because sometimes when they look to win or lose an argument as opposed to really settling the argument, they do become personal. You know, so let's say me and Joe get in an argument. It could be friends, could be whoever it is. And let's say, you know, I'm starting to sway the argument to my perspective, and Joe gets angry. Joe's not looking to resolve anymore. This is personal for Joe. So Joe wants to win the argument. So Joe could start attacking me personally by saying, hey, I'm not one of your inmates. I'm not, you know, don't treat me like an inmate. And it's like, wait a second, I'm not. It's a simple argument, you know, and what does that mean? Like what type of person do you think I am? Like, all of a sudden you think that, you know, when I'm at work, I'm this asshole and I start just yelling at people and all this other stuff. And then when I'm home, I'm supposed to be this really on the extreme, this really nice person. It's like sometimes your loved ones could be at fault too, where, you know, they may have this assumption of who you are behind that wall. And sometimes you got to correct them. I've done it a few times, you know, where it's like, hey, how do you think I am? Like, how do you think I talk to the inmates? Do you think I go around and have absolute authority? I have the perception of authority, but I don't have absolute authority. You know, once I lose the respect with the inmate manipulation, I have no authority. You know, I mean, let's just be honest there, you know? So, I mean, when you say, when your loved one says, well, you treat me like I'm an inmate, I may go back and say, well, wait a second. How do you think I treat the inmates? Because technically, and this is the scary thing, don't take this the wrong way, but I may have more control of how I treat you than I treat the inmates. You know, I mean, what I mean by that is outside control. Like how I treat you is one thing, but I'll be honest, you'd be shocked how good these inmates get treated. You know, so when someone comes up to you and says, you know, you have an argument and it becomes personal as opposed to resolution, and they come out and they say, well, you know, you're treating me like an inmate, I would go back and say, well, hold on, what kind of person do you think I am? Like, because I'm still me at the job. So I would love to get an understanding of where this transition is. Now, granted, here's the scary thing. For people that live that life by this supposed switch, maybe that makes sense. You know, maybe that makes sense. Maybe, you know, you're telling your loved one, you turn yourself off and on and create this awkwardness between roles where there's no transition. It's just absolute this or absolute that. So if you're your loved one, they see the extreme, you know, the aggressive or assertive versus the really nice person. So all of a sudden, the human element comes in one day. You could get an argument with your loved one, and all of a sudden, the moment you say a sentence with an exclamation point, they attack you like, well, I'm not one of your inmates. It's like, wow. And you may actually start to believe that because you're living on extremes of both roles. And it's like, holy crap, this is the first time I used an exclamation point. So maybe my wife's right. But for me, if my wife's never said that, but if she ever did, I would have to now, whatever the argument is, hold off, stop. I got to ask you, who do you think I am when I work behind that wall? Because that's going to shut down every argument right now until we can figure this out. The moment you're telling me I'm treating my family like they're inmates, I need to discover who the hell do you think I am when I'm working behind the wall? What's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, and I agree. You know, and you know, there are times, and you know, I was sitting there laughing to myself because, you know, years ago, you know, I think everybody's heard of Jeff Foxworthy, and you might be a redneck if. You know, there was a thing that I had done. I'll have to send you that list of emails so you can read it. But, you know, we called it, you might be a correctional officer if, you know, you do have people that will come home and their professional lives do kind of incorporate into their personal lives without really being cognitive of it. And, you know, thankfully at the time I had a wife that kind of brake checked me. You know, it's just little things, you know, when you come home and you tell your kids to rack up, or, you know, you tell the neighbor kids that your kids can't come out because they're on rec restriction. You know, there are times where that shit will bleed over into your personal life, but you got to have that one person there that will kind of ground you and say, hey, they're your kids, not your inmates. You know, this profession has a funny way of incorporating both personal and professional lives together sometimes. You know, it's the way it happens, the way it transitions is so funny. And that's one of those things where it's almost a requirement to have somebody there that can ground you and kind of help you separate, you know, both of those sides and kind of find a neutrality somewhere down the center. But it shouldn't be one of those things that just totally, you know, just overtakes one life or the other. You know, again, turning it on or off is just not, it's just not a possibility to me. And that's just my opinion. You know, you can incorporate some things into other sides, you know, using a humor factor, because I'm telling you, anybody who does this job for a specific amount of time will wind up with some sort of sick humor. And the people on the outside of that scope will question you and like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You're not right. You know, so having that on or off switch, again, to me isn't a possibility. You got to have people in your life on both sides of that scope that can kind of ground you and help you along and kind of keep you in a neutral zone.
Yeah. And guys, before we close, let me add one more thought. You know, I think when we're talking about on or off, as I said, we're talking about either or, we're talking about extremes when we're trying to tell you now the balance. So maybe I'll say something and I'll put it out there. It's okay. So, for example, let's take compassion. You know, people are like, oh, you can't have compassion in corrections. Well, you can't let compassion control you. But yes, compassion is needed in corrections, just not to the extreme. So therefore, compassion in home life could play out to what's needed to be respected as a correctional officer or just in the corrections profession. So the key here is controlling the emotion as opposed to having the emotion control you. And then on the other side, let's talk about control or vigilance. You know, that's something that, you know, definitely is needed in corrections. Definitely something that we must have or maintain, but it could also be very helpful in the real world. But with that said, not to the point where it controls you or makes you paranoid. So with that said, there's always going to be that balance. And, you know, this either or where I have to be one thing or the other. And if God forbid that one thing leaks into the other, oh my God, this is not supposed to happen. No, it makes sense because there are experiences that are going to have an effect on you, but you can either be affected by it or control it. And I think that's what we're talking about here. It's not about either or, but rather how you can balance things in the middle. And, you know, I just want to add one more thing. Some may actually compare the either or to hard or soft. It's nothing to do with hard or soft. It's more of the professional versus the human side of things. And at the end of the day, I'm comfortable bringing those two together. If I see things as hard or soft, I don't want to bring those together because I don't want those from that perspective leaking into either side. I don't want the hard side leaking into the family side. I don't want the soft side leaking into the correctional side. So when you define it by those terms, of course, you want to be either or extreme, but that's the wrong ways to define it. It's more of the professional versus the human element. And I'm okay with trying to see where those blend in. I'm okay with not trying to keep that at either or because that's the balance. The balance is pretty much how do you keep professional and the human element connected. Hey, Joe, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, you know, in this profession, you know, it's not as simple as turning things on or off. You know, everything that we do, every interaction that we have on a daily basis in or out of, you know, our profession, regardless whether it's our personal life or, you know, things that we do on a daily basis, every decision we make, every interaction that we have with a person has some sort of compassion level, you know, attached to it. And, you know, we got to remember that we're not one or the other. We're both. We're both a correctional officer, and we're both a husband or a father or, you know, a brother or what have you. You know, so don't think for a minute that this profession or, you know, your personal life is easy as turning off a light switch, because it's not. You know, the most important thing is finding balance in what we do and how we can do it. The level of professionalism that we have, you know, in both our professional and our personal interactions, plays a major factor in the type of individual that we become, or you know, that we try to instill in others. You know, it takes, what's that old saying? It takes zero energy to be a human, and it takes everything within you to be an asshole. You know, don't be the asshole. Be that person that has interactions with folks with the level of compassion, regardless whether it's an inmate, regardless whether it's your staff member, regardless, you know, regardless if it's your wife or your kids. You know, always remember everybody's human, and, you know, you want to be treated the way you treat others. And, you know, that has a way of coming back to you. It may not be today, it may not be next week, but 20 years down the line, you'll be questioning the choices that you made. So always, you know, approach all situations with professionalism, with some sort of tact and a human element, because I'm telling you, it will make you a better person. It will make you a better supervisor. It will make you a better leader. It will make you a better administrator, and it will make you a better person at home.
Love that. And guys, my closing thoughts basically is, you know, when you kind of live trying to, you know, turn one side on, one side off, you wind up also limiting your options to whatever that extreme is. I mean, sometimes you may be dealing with an inmate and it requires some level of compassion. But if you sit there on that either or, where you put compassion on this side of the switch, then that doesn't even become a solution. You're going to go right back to being aggressive when that may not be the moment that calls for that. And on the other side, you know, you may have to believe that you have to be with your family, super soft. And it's like, well, I can't allow myself to be assertive because I'm not going to play a correctional officer with my family. No one's saying you are, but sometimes there will be times when you have to be assertive. You know, it's literally balancing both, allowing yourself to be what's in the middle, which is human. That's what it is. You're not being dictated by a role. You're just allowing yourself to be human, because, again, when you were hired to cross into this profession, you were hired for the potential you have, not what you could be transformed into. And I think that's part of the evolution of where we're at in corrections when it comes to our mental health. As always, guys, the show is here. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.